Welcome to Crossroads. The significance of some of the diplomatic moves the CCP has made recently cannot be understated. It appears what the regime is trying to do right now is enact a plan for the so-called Eurasian Empire, and that's pretty significant. It's making key moves right now to create a new world order, so to speak, and to cut off the United States from this new system. Now, the enacting of this new agenda actually was pretty public, but it was easy to miss. During the recent meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Chinese Communist Party and member states, they announced their plans for a new trade and security alliance within the Eurasian bloc, and something notably that can rival NATO. Immediately after that, the CCP launched a diplomatic tour, shifting old policies to try to woo countries, including India, the Philippines, and others, which until then have been the focus of conflicts with the CCP. It was a sudden shift. And alongside that, the CCP has been carrying out similar moves throughout Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, and Asia. And this has likewise been accompanied by an increased military boldness against the United States. Now, to understand what's now taking place, we actually have to go back to the concepts of Duginism and the proposed plans in Russia for a so-called Eurasian Empire. Now, first off, you might remember a couple weeks ago, the Chinese Communist Party in Russia led meetings again of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, it's branded as a Eurasian political, economic, international security and defense organization, kind of like CCP-led NATO, basically. The CCP in Russia, they started that back in 2001. And it brought together this time leaders and representatives from the CCP, Russia, Belarus, India, Iran, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. All the countries right between China and Russia, of course, connecting that road. And of course, reaching out to other ones through, again, other means. And during this, a new plan for the region was rolled out during those meetings, which was framed by many news outlets as a new rival to NATO. It created a new trade agreement and security alliance for Eurasia. Now, immediately after, the CCP appears to begun a charm campaign with heavy focus again in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. And it included the CCP backing off some of its hostilities, at least locally. Now, to understand why this matters, we need to go into the significance of Eurasia and the interest in a Eurasian empire from Russia and the CCP. Now, the Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin has explained this concept. He has a lot of influence, of course, politically in Russia. Now, he backs the CCP's part of this as well. The accompanying part on the Chinese side is known as Tianxia, basically a theory that all nations need to accept the CCP's influence. And the basic idea from Dugin is that whoever controls the Eurasian region controls the world. The proposal he had within Russia revolved around rejecting the United States and the US-led order, which has, of course, defined the world since the end of World War II. Dugin wanted Russia to be in charge of this new system. But with Russia now weakened and becoming more dependent on China, the Chinese Communist Party is now positioning itself to enact that strategy. Now, the core idea is to have the whole Eurasian region reject so-called Atlanticism, and that's a reference to rejecting the United States and the democratic system of so-called neoliberalism, as they refer to it. Now, the plan ironically uses a narrative to focus on domestic nationalism with, ironically, tradition in each respective country, but with a heavy leaning towards fascism and communism. Dugin's theory on the so-called fourth political system is that the 20th century was defined by the battle between communism, fascism, and liberal democracy. Liberal democracy won in the end, but he believes there will still be a battle, a last battle, to decide the form of government for the world going forward. Again, the kind of last battle of political systems. And whoever wins this defines the future. And so he argued for merging communism and fascism, taking the parts that he claims worked, making a new political system, the fourth political system, which he refers to as National Bolshevism. The national part, of course, being a reference to National Socialism or Nazism, and Bolshevism being a reference to Russian communism. Now, the CCP actually has a very similar system to this already. heavy nationalism, a state interventionist economic system, and a communist party dominating the political system. Now, the vision of this plan is to have a similar model for all of Eurasia, all the Middle Eastern countries, all the European countries, all the Asian region, everybody, even North Africa, all part of that same basic system of government. And the CCP has a model for this. They call it the China model. And their goal is to export that, again, under their so-called Tianxia concept. They want to be the world leader within that. Now, of course, the CCP in Russia don't refer to this as Duginism or as the idea of a so-called Eurasian Empire. They refer to this as the creation of the multipolar world order, which means overthrowing the so-called unipolar world order, which is led by the United States currently. Now, one of the first things we're watching is the CCP trying to play a role as a peace broker. And first off, let's look at Ukraine. AP says this: Ukraine's foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, has said he is seeking common ground in talks this week with his Chinese counterpart on ending his country's war with Russia. Kuleba met Wednesday with Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Guangzhou, a major commercial and manufacturing center in southern China, which is, of course, symbolic to the kind of deal they're going to be making because that means business. And notes it's the first visit to the country by Ukrainian foreign minister since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has strained Ukraine's relations with China. He said this, quote, "I am convinced that a just peace in Ukraine is in China's strategic interest, and China's role as a global force for peace is important," Kuleba said in opening remarks. Now, they note that China has close ties with Russia and has pushed for an end to the war that would take into account the interests of both sides. Now, briefly on that, again, the CCP was not pushing for peace. The CCP actually made other countries reject and boycott the meetings when, again, more than 100 countries got together to discuss a peace deal. What the CCP wants is for Russia, and the CCP by extension, to have a seat on that discussion. And of course, what that means really is because obviously if these countries are coming together with their side of the deal, the CCP is intervening in them making their side of the deal. What the CCP was saying openly was that they wanted a peace deal that has also the interests of the CCP involved. And of course, with the Chinese Communist Party being the enabling factor in keeping the war going, they're the ones who hold the cards. Now on this will mean that the Chinese Communist Party will have its own hand in the negotiations. Ukraine is also the gateways to Eastern Europe especially. Whoever makes a peace deal there is going to determine the future narratives on the war and therefore have influence within that region. And if the Chinese Communist Party, let's say, makes a deal where maybe it has some of the rebuilding contracts, maybe through the Belt and Road Initiative into Ukraine and into Russia, that means, of course, they can extend their railways, they can extend their transportation systems, they can expand their networks and begin controlling that part of the world. Again, that is their gateway to Europe. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party is also developing close ties with Hungary, and that lets the CCP get a voice within NATO because, of course, they're a member of NATO. And Hungary, notably, has been pushing for Russia and the CCP's side of the arguments on Ukraine within NATO. Notably, was announced that in April, Hungary took a €1 billion loan from the Chinese Communist Party and is part of the CCP's new plans for a Eurasian trade network. Bloomberg noted that Hungary said it took a €1 billion loan in April from China, adding that such financing is likely to become more widespread, meaning more deals lined up, in the future as economic links with the Asian nation grow. And meanwhile, in Western Europe, the Chinese Communist Party's strategy with the European Union is to divide and conquer. The EU itself has been growing stronger against the CCP, and so the CCP approach to Europe has been to bypass the EU and then go to individual member states. I'll be talking about this more after I come back from a quick break.
Experts agree, one of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to enact a plan for a so-called Eurasian Empire. Now, it's making key moves to cut off the United States from this new system. And during the recent meetings of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the CCP and its member states with that group announced their plans for a new Eurasian trade alliance along with a new security bloc that can rival NATO. And not only that, the CCP has positioned itself as a peace broker in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And meanwhile, in Western Europe, the CCP strategies I briefly mentioned with the European Union is to divide and conquer. And why is that? Well, it's because the European Union is relatively strong against the CCP. They've been pushing back. And so the CCP approach has been to bypass the EU and go directly to the individual member states. Europe is facing some major ideological shifts right now. Some of the new far-right parties seem to buy into the Russian and CCP narratives of rejecting liberal democracy as it's being framed. And of course, the propaganda trying to link that with all the crazy woke stuff going on. And through that, they're also encouraging these countries to abandon the US-led global system and to instead recognize the rising powers, so to speak, which is a reference within the CCP's Eurasian Empire narrative. Now, one of the recent examples of this is that Italy is now saying it will relaunch its programs to cooperate with the Chinese Communist Party. They just announced so-called a reset in their relations, in fact. Euronews said this: Italy and China signed a 3-year action plan on Sunday to implement past agreements and experiment with new forms of cooperation. Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, said on an official visit to the Chinese capital just recently. And notes that Meloni is trying to reset relations with China as fears of a trade war with the European Union are interwoven with continued interest in attracting Chinese investment in auto manufacturing and other sectors. It says further that her 5-day visit comes several months after Italy dropped out of China's Belt and Road Initiative, a signature policy of Chinese leader Xi Jinping to build power and transportation infrastructure around the world to stimulate global trade, also deepening China's ties with other nations. Again, the CCP gets them in debt traps, oftentimes takes over the infrastructure, and then gains a foothold within the country through those ties. Typically how it works. Now, similar to how the CCP is inserting itself into talks on peace between Russia and Ukraine, right? It's made it so that it has to be the go-to country for any of those discussions. The CCP is also setting itself in a similar position in the war between the Palestinian factions, Fatah and Hamas and the others, which establishes the CCP notably as also the go-to voice on that side. Reuters said this: Palestinian rivals, including Hamas and Fatah, agreed to form a unity government at talks hosted by China, Beijing said on Tuesday, just recently. A deal meant to deliver a post-war Gaza administration, but quickly rejected by Israel as it seeks to crush Hamas. Again, remember, Israel's terms for the war is that Hamas needs to be eliminated, and especially they cannot have any kind of future role in the government. What the CCP just did was ensure that any future government involving the Palestinians at all is going to have Hamas as a part of it. And by doing that, the CCP has basically changed the name of the whole war. They've made it so that Israel, on its terms, is not going to want to end this. And they've made it so this thing is going to drag out now until people are willing to negotiate, and the negotiations on the CCP side is exactly this: have a post-war Gaza administration, notably which the CCP will very likely have a voice in. Now, they note here that analysts said the agreement would prove hard to implement with complications including the deep enmity between Palestinian factions and Western opposition to Hamas having any role in governance. No timetable was declared for implementation, but they say the Beijing Declaration, as they're calling it, was signed at the closing ceremony of a reconciliation dialogue among 14 Palestinian factions held in China's capital from July 21st to 23rd according to the readout. Now, this Palestine deal positions the CCP on the side of Palestine, notably against Israel. But it also sets up the CCP to become the go-to if there's ever going to become a peace deal in the future. Although, again, it's not totally solid because you never know if the Palestinian factions will end up getting along with each other long enough for that to happen. But this is also not to mention the Chinese Communist Party has pretty deep sway already, with its close ties notably with Iran, its programs with Pakistan, the Taliban, other countries in the region. The CCP is trying to establish itself as a player on that side of the negotiations. And of course, with the whole Eurasia, agenda, they need to control the Muslim world. Now, meanwhile, in Asia, just after the meetings, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the regime's third plenum on its new economic plan, the CCP made some very sudden changes to the way that it deals with other countries in the region. All of a sudden, the Chinese Communist Party seems to be trying to cool its ties with the Philippines and with India. Now look, in that region, two of the biggest topics in terms of conflicts are around the CCP's hostilities with its various territorial claims, and also on the other side, the civil war in Myanmar. Now briefly, with Myanmar, the CCP hasn't shown any signs it's going to intervene, although it does have a lot of ties within the country. But it wouldn't be out of character as well if the CCP wanted to intervene. Remember, because brokering peace in Eurasia is on the CCP's agenda. And if it brokers peace deals, that gives it influence over what the decision is, right? Hegelian dialectics, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Create a conflict and then make the resolution to that something that goes in your favor. That's how it works. The Ukraine deal gives the CCP a say in Europe. The Palestine deal gives the CCP a say in the Middle East. And the conflicts in Asia would give it a say there, if it can again inject itself as a player within those negotiations. And I think it might do that. But when it comes to the South China Sea, we're seeing this as a kind of peace deal, notably to be brokered as well. The Chinese Communist Party, of course, is the main instigator in these conflicts, which makes it a bit complicated. And of course, that would make it difficult for it to end unless the CCP were to back off its own hostilities. And interestingly, suddenly, that's exactly what we're suddenly watching the CCP do. Bloomberg noted a bloc of Southeast Asian nations sees an opportunity to build momentum for diplomacy among countries staking claims in the South China Sea following a provisional accord between China and the Philippines. Now, for the first time since these conflicts began, Philippine troops were able to sail to a disputed shoal without having any pushback from the CCP, according again to AP News here. And we'll of course see if this policy holds up. Already Philippine leaders are suggesting that the CCP mischaracterized the deal, but it seems the Chinese Communist Party is putting on the charm. In fact, just one point in this, the Philippines, they recently shut down a Chinese online gambling operation in the country. Normally, you would see criticisms from the CCP over things like this, but not this time. AP says this: China issued a rare compliment to the administration of Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. on Thursday for his order banning widespread and Chinese-run online gambling operations. Notes that Marcos accused some of venturing into crimes including financial scams, human trafficking, kidnappings, torture, and murder. Of course, the other side of relations between the Philippines and the CCP will be the United States. The U.S. right now is being allowed to deploy more military assets to the Philippines, which the CCP is very unhappy about, let's say. But there, just like throughout Eurasia, the CCP is very likely going to try to deepen its influence first, then move to the next phase of the Eurasian strategy to try to push out the United States. And the CCP isn't hiding what it wants either. It announced its new agenda on trade and security within the Eurasian region. They said this publicly. Internally, Russian politics have pushed for a similar agenda, the whole idea of this Eurasian Empire. And I'll be talking more about this only on EpochTV.com. It's the uncensored streaming platform of the Epoch Times. So if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, X, Rumble, there's a link in the description below. Click on that, get access to the rest of this episode. And not only will you get access to my whole library of shows, but also family-friendly movies, premium investigative reports, and hard-hitting documentaries on issues that matter, like the Chinese Communist Party's 100-year plan to defeat the United States. which I expose in my documentary, The Final War. The CCP is one of the biggest threats to America. They're using things like video games, entertainment, movies, culture to subvert and influence the next generation. This unrestricted war against our country is one of the scariest but least understood issues of our time because it's not tangible. There's no tanks or bombs. It's being done through soft power means and ideological subversion. Now, I spent over a decade investigating the CCP's subversion, and it's such an important issue that I've dedicated my career to warning people about the threats of the CCP. If you'd like to find out more about what exactly the CCP is plotting against America, then watch The Final War. You can find the link in the description below, and I'll show you all the trailer before we go exclusively to epictv.com for the rest of this episode. I'll see you all there.
The greatest threat facing the United States is the CCP.
The Epoch Times investigation team had studied the CCP for years, but what we uncovered was yielding evidence beyond our imagination.
With Chairman Mao, with the Prime Minister, our talks have been characterized by frankness.
The Clinton administration said, oh, don't worry about it. This will be a poison pill for China.
China's strategic goal is to make sure that the U.S. has 4 enemies, and one of them must be a terrorist group.
We are giving of our life's blood so that the Chinese Communist Party can survive and thrive.